This is my Redstone Sudoku machine. There are many like it, but this one is mine. With the exception of the different types of memory, which use pistons and redstone blocks, I will use redstone wire, torches, and repeaters. No mods or any other fancy stuff. I want to make it a bit more interesting by going for a minimal button-based user interface instead of having like 25 levers, which probably would give a simpler and faster machine, but you know, so would any like actual programming language also. In this video, I will go over what led me to make this contraption, explain how each component works and how they interact with each other, and to end it off, I will show a time lapse of me solving a Sudoku on my machine. Now this all started when a 10-year-old-ish me was on Newgrounds one weekend. My eye then spots a game called Logic Gates or Logic Gate Simulator, something like that. I think it's some puzzle game and I'm intrigued. I click the game to find a white screen, some weird symbols, and a whole lot of questions on my end. But there was also a link to help answer those questions. I get an idea of how things work and make the world's lamest calculator ever. Pictured here. Years pass. Minecraft is now a thing. Play that a bit. Read about Redstone. It's similar to Logic Gates? Well, that is just my home turf because of that one little thing I made several years ago. So I decided to take things a step further and build the world's second lamest calculator ever. And, you know, a hop, skip, and a rocket launch. The only logical next step was making a Sudoku machine. I made a couple components, got stuck, kind of forgot about the project. But a couple years later, I didn't get any further. Started over, kind of forgot the project again. Heck, my laptop eventually got cursed and could not even run any version of Minecraft with any version of Java on any operating system. But years later, new computer, education starts, get invested in all sorts of nerdy shit. Remember. And this time, done did it. Now it's all neat and tidy with everything in its place in this big obsidian case, but it's kind of reductive for what I'm trying to do right now. So let's just open up the console, see time, and -1 day or something like that, yeah. And then we totally end up going back to just before I packaged it all together. I also have some isolated components and failed prototypes scattered about, so now we can get started. So each move starts with pressing a button. There's decrement, increment, move the pointer on the small scale, and move it in regards to the larger clusters of cells. Now, because some of the components rely on timing, it would really just be nicer and faster if these buttons only outputted 1 tick long signals instead of the, I think it's 6 for stone buttons. And that is why I have these. Now the component that this signal is connected to is triggered by a falling edge. So if this signal is low, things happen. So the way we get that 1 low tick is the button is pressed, torch turned off, and for 1 tick this repeater is turned off and this repeater is also turned off. The tick after that, this torch is turned on and this repeater is turned on, and then it's set to high again. Then the button is released, the torch turns on again, and for 1 tick both the repeaters are turned on, and then that one turns off, and as such we avoid a second falling edge, so only 1 signal, which is 1 tick long, goes through. Exactly what we want. Now it's a bit more complicated for the increment and decrement because those buttons will be pressed a whole lot more. For example, if we have number 0 and we want to go to 5, we'll have to press increment 5 times or decrement 5 times. And if you just hold down the button, let me demonstrate, you get, I forgot to turn this off. You get 1 tick, which is registered, but now this torch is just turned on, and this torch will remain turned off, and then you won't get any further. But if we turn it on again and then press the button and hold it down, we get a nice little clock. And these repeaters have then been calibrated to ensure that the signals come out at an interval that do not mess up the component that's connected to, because otherwise you can end up getting numbers that you were not going for. And with the example before, we want 5, so I just hold this down, and as you'll notice, the light turns on below me to show how many signals actually go through, and 5. And that way I have somewhat circumvented that it is really slow. You know, it's redstone, so that is to be expected. These two sets of buttons are connected to the pointers, which can be found over here. There are 2 of them, one for the small grid, one for the large grid. And at first there's quite a lot to take in, but in essence it is a 3x3 grid of IS latches. And each of those IS latches is connected to their neighboring IS latches through AND gates. If we simplify this and just look at this column, we will see that this IS latch, for example, is connected to this one through this AND gate. It has a bit of a weird form, but it is nevertheless an AND gate. Input, input, output. And it connects down to this one through this AND gate, input, input, output. And each of these AND gates have 2 inputs, so where does the second input come from? Well, it comes from these 4 signals, which we control with the buttons over there. And each of these signals are connected to all the AND gates that point in a specific direction. So if we take this signal, the up direction, it will take the AND gate from this one to this one's here, and the same for all the others. And then when we, for example, press this button, this AND gate will have both of its inputs activated, because we only have this IS latch set, so all the other AND gates that it affects will not yield any result. But now this one is set, and this one is set, hypothetically, and that's not very convenient. So that is why each of these inputs are also connected to this signal, which resets all the IS latches, including those 2 we're setting. Well, that's even less counterproductive. Now we don't have any points up. But because of the way it is timed, the IS latches get reset while this AND gate is still updating. So in a way, the signal is kept safe in this AND gate, and then when the heat blows over and it's safe for it to come out, it activates this IS latch, and then we only have one signal set. Now in the first version of this component, if you were to move the signal off the grid, you would just lose it, and there would be no way to get it back other than manually going over here and moving one of the redstone blocks. And that's something I wanted to avoid. So I originally thought of having an extra layer of AND gates that then would loop back to the same IS latch. But then I realized there's an even simpler solution for that. So if we look here, for example, with these darker blocks, each of the IS latches from this column, the far right, go through this OR gate and lead this signal, and the signal which goes to the input for moving to the right. And if we try to move the pointer signal off the grid, then nothing happens because it's supplying its own signal. And then the same is just done with the others, and that way you can't really break the component just through the user interface. Both of the pointers are connected to all the cells. So if we try to find the cell where the two active signals of the pointers intersect, we will see just why they're so important. And that would appear to be this one. So we have the signal of the large pointer going here, and the signal of the small pointer going here. And they feed into this NAND gate. So if both of the inputs are high, the output is low, otherwise the output is high. And this is important because here we have the decrement signal, and here we have the increment signal. And both of those signals are connected to all the cells as well. But in the cases of the other cells, for example here, it's the NAND gate output's high, and the same here. If the decrement or increment signal is sent and the torch is turned off, then on the other cells it will not make a difference because the NAND gate output's high regardless. So this one cell is the only place where the increment and decrement signals will have an effect. And another thing this NAND gate does is each of them connects to 4 of these torches, and if we follow that signal, we will see that it lights up the torches on the front to show where the pointer is and which value will be changed by the increment or decrement function. Now say we're making a Sudoku for someone else, and we don't trust them, and we don't want them to be able to tamper with the initial values because that will make it very easy to beat the Sudoku, then we can pull this lever. And what you will see here is that despite the 2 pointers going into this NAND gate, it still outputs high. So now if we were to take the increment or decrement signal, nothing would happen, similar to as if the cell wasn't selected at all. But there's still a difference to whether both the pointers point to the cell because of this AND gate, which leads over here, sends this signal, and if we go back to the front, we will see that that signal turns on this torch in the top left corner. So that way you still know where your pointer is, and you also can see that this number cannot be altered without manually going in and doing stuff which you're not supposed to do because you're just playing at Sudoku. And now we've come to the heart of the machine, the component keeping track of the entire state of the Sudoku. All the other components are made to either display or alter its contents. So when I first wanted to make this component, I tried to make it a counting system similar to how you would count with your fingers, where you increment once and then the first bit is set, increment again, then the second bit is set as well, and then when it reaches 9, all the bits are set. But having the counting circuitry as well as running these 9 outputs would not fit into that 8x8 space for each cell. And then I realized, well, this is computer stuff, so why not make it binary? Then I made it binary. And now, this is maybe slightly more complicated circuitry, but we only have 4 outputs to worry about, which I can just barely get to fit in. And the way it counts with binary is rather simple. You flip the first bit, and if it is set, then you also flip the next bit, and then you continue that way. So the bit flips itself by this block going into an AND gate leading to its own piston. So if we increment once, we'll see that it invert itself, and now this torch is on. So if we were to increment again, this torch will not be turned on. Instead, the torch over here, which is now turned off, would go into this AND gate and reset the bit again. Another thing is that this was the only bit that was inverted, and that is because this torch, which was turned on just before, its signal continued into this repeater, preventing the falling edge from continuing to the other bits. But now, when it is turned off, if we increment again, we will see that both of these bits are flipped. And it works quite similar with decrement. The only difference is we want the falling edge to continue when the bit is reset instead of set. And this is done first of all by this wire being slightly diverted, so the signal cannot go from this torch into this repeater. And then we also have this torch, which usually is set and prevents the falling edge from continuing. But in this case, where the bit is reset, this torch turned on, turns off this torch. So if we decrement, we can see the signal continuing, but only until it reaches the set bit. A neat little property with binary counters is that it automatically wraps around. So if you are at 15, where all the bits are set, and you increment once, it will go to 16, which would be this one non-existent bit turned on and all the others turned off. But since that one does not exist, we just end up with 0, and that's pretty neat. But since we want the numbers from 1 to 9 and a blank space, then we end up with 6 useless states. So in the implementation into the actual machine, there is a bit of extra circuitry, which we can see here. So the first thing we wanted to do is when it increments up to 10, we want it to go wrap around to 0. So when it's at 10, the second and fourth bit will be turned on. 2 plus 8 gives 10. And this then goes into an AND gate here, second bit, fourth bit, and sneaks its way through here like the nerdiest stealth game up to this signal up here, which is connected to the reset of all the bits. So when it reaches 10, all the bits are reset and we go back to 0. The other wraparound we want is when we're at 0 and we decrement, which will put us to 15, where all the bits are set. We want it to go to 9. A tricky thing with this is when all the bits are set, the second and fourth bit are also set. So this signal would still be activated, resetting all the bits, were it not because the decrement signal also leads to this torch, ensuring that it stays off and the bits are not reset. Because we only want to reset the second and third bit, and this is done 2 separate places. The first we have is this AND gate, which uses the first, second, and fourth bit, which then goes through there, this block holding that torch, which then resets the second bit. And the other thing we have is this torch, which is connected to the NAND gate, I guess, of the fourth and second bit, which would mean this repeater would be off. And when the decrement signal also is activated, this torch will be turned off, this torch will be turned on, and then it will reset the third bit, and as a harmless side effect also set the fourth bit again. And just like that, the counter stays within 0 and 9, and then if it goes out of that range, it will wrap around to the other end. Now we have this binary output. We want to convert to a form that's easier to work with. Also, so instead of displaying binary, we can take something that's more suitable for Sudoku, like decimal. So we would want to have 9 separate signals, one for each number, and the signal corresponding to the number in the counter will be high, while the other 8 signals will be low. And to do that, we have this component, which I guess you would call a 4 to 9 line decoder, because it takes the 4-bit binary input and then converts it to 9 separate outputs. And the circuitry of this component is more tedious than complicated. So for each number, we want all 4 bits to go into a signal, which then ends up at a torch. And if the bit is supposed to be high for this specific number, we will invert the input before then. Otherwise, it will not be inverted. So the bits have been placed in whichever way was easiest to wire, not what makes sense and is intuitive. So we have 1, 2, 4, 8. And in this case we have the number 9, because 1 is inverted and so is 8. So when the binary counter is at 9, this signal will be low, this torch will be activated, and this signal will then be high. So if we look at the counter in its current state, we will see that it is at 5, which is the one over here, where 1 and 4 are inverted and the other 2 are not. So we can see that this signal is low, this torch is activated, and then we have 5 as the only high output right in the middle of it all. Now it does have 9 outputs, which is what we try to avoid with the binary counter, but because the circuitry is so much simpler, it's possible to fit it all in regardless. Finally, we want to be able to display the numbers in a more readable format, and to do that I have used a Minecraftification of the good old 7-segment display, probably most typically seen on digital clocks, but also on a lot of other small digital devices. And I have an implementation of such 7-segment display here. It has 7 inputs, one for each segment, and each input protrudes a line of blocks to draw so we can draw the number similar to as can be seen on the finalized product. There's a bit of overlap between the segments. For example, this top left block should both be included in this segment here for the 3, but also in this segment here for the 4, so things just look nicer. There's an exception with the middle segment, which is just this one block. That's mostly because I could not figure out how to also include the other blocks, but I do also think it looks nicer for the 3, and the 3 is the only one affected by this, than if the line stretched all the way. And now we just need the 9 outputs of the 4 to 9 line decoder to connect to the corresponding segments. But having 9 signals cross each other in such a limited space to reach several places quickly became troublesome. But then I realized that the numbers aren't all that different. I mean, 2 and 5 are just mirrored, 3 is also pretty similar to those 2, and 9 is just 6 rotated. So I messed around a bit and found out that with these 6 clusters I could draw all the numbers. So I made this component, which takes 6 inputs, one for each cluster. then interfaces with the 7-segment display to draw that cluster. And now this component here, which connects the 9 inputs to the corresponding clusters instead of the individual segments, while it still has those 9 signals that have to cross each other, it is simpler than it was before and it's easier to manage. And that, together with a couple shortcuts, for example 6 is just 5 with this cluster, and 7 is just 1 with that cluster, and 8 is just 6 and 9, I was able to fit this trio of display components into a 5x5 cell, which is smaller than the 7x7 cell that I ended up using, because these were the first components I made, and I was naive and thought that this would work, which definitely didn't. And so over here we can see the components squished together to be more space and time efficient, 1 or 2 fewer pieces. And yeah, that's all the components. And then just connect them together, use a bunch of time wiring it, recolor it, and multiply it 81 times, and then you get this wonderful rainbow of science. Yeah. And finally, to demonstrate my machine, I will now use it to solve the Chambers Daily Sudoku from the day after I finished it. The one on the actual day looked kind of And I think that about does it. Took me around 20 minutes. Hey! You know, this machine is quite special to me. While I was building the world's second lamest calculator, I suddenly realized how much fun I was having with it. And I thought, there's probably some job that's somewhat relevant to this. So I asked my mom if there was any job where I had to work with logic gates, and she responded with computer scientist. And then I decided, that's what I'm gonna be. And now I'm studying computer science, and I'm loving every moment of it. So, I guess, thanks Notch, and whoever made that Newgrounds logic gate game thing, for helping me figure out what I want to more or less spend the rest of my life doing.